In July 2025, President Samia Suluhu Hassan stood at a uranium processing plant in southern Tanzania and launched a project most people never heard about. Russia built it. Rosatom, their state nuclear corporation, will now extract and process uranium from Tanzanian soil for the next 20 years. And with that single moment, Tanzania's trajectory shifted in ways that won't show up in headlines for years. This isn't about one plant. It's about what comes after. Because when a country locks in a 20-year partnership that touches its most strategic resources, it's not just signing a contract. It's choosing a direction. And Tanzania just chose one that puts Russia at the center of its energy future, while the West is busy reviewing aid packages and issuing statements about democracy. Tanzania matters more than most people realize. 67 million people. Africa's fifth largest population. It sits on the Indian Ocean with ports that serve 8 landlocked nations: Zambia, Malawi, Rwanda, Uganda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, South Sudan. Over 90% of Tanzania's international trade moves through Dar es Salaam port. When cargo enters East and Central Africa, it flows through Tanzania. That's not just economic geography, that's strategic leverage. The port of Dar es Salaam handles more than 92% of Tanzania's maritime trade. It's the 4th largest port on Africa's Indian Ocean coast. It connects directly to the Middle East, Far East, Europe, and the Americas. And it's not just about Tanzania. The port serves an entire region of landlocked countries that depend on Tanzanian infrastructure to access global markets. Control influence in Tanzania, and you touch trade routes affecting hundreds of millions of people across multiple countries. Russia saw that, and they didn't just show up with weapons or mercenaries like they did in the Sahel. They showed up with something longer lasting: energy infrastructure, technical cooperation, university scholarships, the kind of engagement that builds dependencies over decades instead of months, the kind that doesn't make headlines but compounds quietly. The Mkuju River uranium project isn't new. Rosatom's subsidiary Uranium One acquired it in 2020. But construction accelerated in 2024, and by July 2025, the processing plant was operational. The full project is valued at $1.2 billion. It's designed to produce 3,000 tons of uranium concentrate annually once it reaches full capacity. That's significant. That's one of the largest uranium extraction operations in Africa, and it's entirely Russian-controlled. Tanzania has the world's 8th largest uranium reserves, over 152 million tons of ore. For decades, those reserves sat mostly untapped. Western companies talked about development, conducted studies, raised environmental concerns, cited regulatory uncertainty, and never committed at scale. Russia didn't hesitate. They offered full financing, technology transfer, local employment, a fast timeline, and Tanzania said yes. Here's where it gets strategic. Uranium isn't just a commodity you sell on spot markets. It's a geopolitical asset. Countries that control uranium supply chains control access to nuclear energy. And nuclear energy is how nations achieve baseload power without depending on fossil fuels or intermittent renewables. Africa's population is projected to double by 2050. Energy demand will explode. Tanzania just positioned itself as a supplier in that future, and Russia positioned itself as the gatekeeper. But the uranium project is only part of the picture. In October 2024, Tanzania and Russia held their first joint intergovernmental commission on trade and economic cooperation in Dar es Salaam. The meeting was chaired by Tanzania's Minister for Planning and Investment Katila Mkumbo and Russia's Minister of Economic Development Maxim Reshetnikov. They signed agreements on fertilizer production, natural gas development, direct flights between Moscow and Zanzibar to boost tourism, and expanded military technical cooperation. That military component is where the long-term positioning becomes clear. In 2016, Russia and Tanzania signed a defense cooperation agreement. Since then, over 200 Tanzanian military personnel have trained at Russian defense universities. Every year, Russia offers 90 scholarships to Tanzanian students for military and technical education. In 2025, they increased that quota to 150. That's not about immediate capability. That's about creating a generation of Tanzanian officers and engineers who were trained in Moscow, who speak Russian, who have professional networks in Russia's defense and technical sectors. That influence doesn't show up in arms sales data, but it shapes decisions for decades. Russia has offered to donate weapons to Tanzania. Not sell. Donate. They've proposed intelligence sharing on counterterrorism, advisory support, training programs. This isn't the high-visibility engagement Russia pursues in Mali or Burkina Faso. There are no Africa Corps units operating openly. No headlines about mercenaries. It's quieter, more embedded. The kind of partnership that builds influence through institutions rather than force. Tanzania's foreign policy has always been non-aligned. During the Cold War, President Julius Nyerere maintained relationships with both the Soviet Union and the West. Tanzania accepted Soviet military aid while also receiving Western development assistance. That pragmatism continues today. Tanzania works with China on infrastructure, the United States on health and security, and now Russia on energy and defense. But the depth of the Russian relationship is accelerating in ways that China and the US haven't matched. China built Tanzania's railways. The Tazara line connecting Dar es Salaam to Zambia opened in 1976 and remains critical infrastructure. China also invested in ports, free trade zones, and power plants. But those projects don't create the same level of dependency as controlling a country's uranium sector. Infrastructure can be managed by anyone once it's built. Uranium extraction requires ongoing technical support, equipment, expertise, maintenance, and that gives Russia sustained leverage. The United States has focused primarily on health programs in Tanzania. PEPFAR funding for HIV treatment, malaria prevention, maternal health. In fiscal year 2024, the U.S. planned to provide $560 million in bilateral assistance. Those programs save lives, but they don't build strategic partnerships the way energy and defense projects do. And as the U.S. scales back foreign aid, that gap is widening. In December 2025, the U.S. State Department announced it was comprehensively reviewing its relationship with Tanzania. The statement cited concerns about religious freedom, free speech, obstacles to U.S. investment, and violence around Tanzania's October 2025 elections. The European Union froze €156 million in aid. They demanded accountability for democratic backsliding. The message was clear. Tanzania needed to meet Western standards or face consequences. Tanzania's response wasn't to apologize. It was to deepen ties with Russia. Foreign Minister Mahmoud Thabet Kambo traveled to Washington in December 2025 to reassure American lawmakers. But at the same time, Tanzania was hosting Russian delegations, signing new agreements, expanding cooperation. Because Tanzania learned something that many African countries are learning. You don't need to choose between powers anymore. You can hedge, play both sides, extract value from everyone, and refuse to be pressured into exclusive relationships. Here's what makes Tanzania different from countries in the Sahel. Tanzania is democratic, relatively stable. It hasn't had a military coup. It's not isolated internationally. That gives it room to maneuver that Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso don't have. Tanzania can engage Russia without triggering the kind of sanctions that hit countries after coups. It can maintain ties with China and the US while deepening Russian partnerships. And as long as Tanzania remains stable, Western countries won't push back aggressively. That's the advantage of strategic ambiguity. But ambiguity has limits. The deeper Russia embeds itself in Tanzania's energy sector, the harder it becomes to reverse course. Uranium extraction requires decades of technical support, equipment maintenance, regulatory compliance, environmental monitoring. Tanzania doesn't have that expertise domestically. Rosatom does. And that dependency creates leverage Russia can use if Tanzania's interests ever diverge from Moscow's. The timing matters. Western aid to Tanzania has been cooling for years. During John Magufuli's presidency from 2015 to 2021, donor relations deteriorated. Magufuli took a nationalist approach that alienated Western partners. Aid dropped. Investment slowed. When Samia Suluhu Hassan took over in 2021, relations improved temporarily. But by 2025, the pattern repeated. Contested elections, democratic concerns, aid freezes, and Tanzania, once again, looked elsewhere. Russia stepped into that space, not with conditions, Not with lectures about governance, with projects, with financing, with partnerships that don't demand political reforms. That's the Russian model in Africa. State-to-state cooperation. Long-term economic agreements. No human rights conditionality. And for governments tired of being lectured by the West, that approach is attractive. In May 2025, Nigeria's Chief of Defense Staff visited Moscow to discuss military cooperation. That same period, Russia expanded its presence in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso through the Africa Corps. Tanzania's engagement fits that broader pattern. Russia is building a network of partnerships across Africa that aren't ideologically driven. They're transactional, practical, and they work because African governments want partners who deliver without imposing governance conditions. The uranium plant at Mkuju River is expected to reach full production by 2029. At that point, Tanzania will be exporting 3,000 tons of uranium concentrate annually. Most of it will go to Russia. Some will be sold to other countries through Rosatom's global network. Either way, Tanzania's role in the nuclear fuel cycle is now established, and Russia controls the infrastructure that makes it possible. This model is scalable. If the Mkuju River project succeeds, other African countries with untapped uranium reserves will take notice. Namibia already signed a $450 million partnership with Russia in April 2025 for uranium processing infrastructure. Burkina Faso signed nuclear cooperation agreements with Russia in 2024. Mali did the same. Ethiopia announced it received IAA approval to build a nuclear power plant with Rosatom. Niger, which hosts significant uranium deposits, is in discussions. Across Africa, Russia is building an ecosystem, not just isolated projects. A coordinated network of energy partnerships that position Rosatom as the continent's primary nuclear development partner. The West has largely ceded this space. After Fukushima in 2011, many Western countries scaled back nuclear ambitions. Regulatory hurdles increased. Financing became scarce. Public opposition grew. Russia didn't hesitate. They maintained state support for Rosatom, subsidized exports, offered financing that made projects viable even when commercial lenders wouldn't touch them. And they marketed nuclear energy not as a risk, but as a solution to energy poverty. The U.S. held its first-ever U.S.-Africa Nuclear Energy Summit in Ghana in May 2024. Officials pledged to be a 100-year nuclear energy partner for Africa. But pledges don't compete with operational plants. Russia isn't promising. They're building. And African governments notice the difference. Tanzania's partnership with Russia isn't ideological. It's opportunistic. Tanzania needs energy infrastructure, industrial development, export revenue. Russia offers all three without demanding electoral reforms or human rights improvements. That doesn't mean Tanzania is abandoning Western partners. It means Tanzania is maximizing options. And right now, Russia is offering what the West isn't. Here's what this really means. Tanzania just locked in a 20-year relationship that will shape its energy sector, train its technical workforce, and integrate its economy with Russian supply chains. That's not something you undo with a policy shift or an election. It's structural, and it gives Russia influence that compounds over time. The port of Dar es Salaam handles over 90% of the trade for 8 landlocked countries. If Russia deepens its foothold in Tanzania, it gains indirect influence over trade flows affecting an entire region. That's not speculative. That's the logical consequence of economic integration. Russia has pursued similar strategies elsewhere. In Egypt, Rosatom is building the El Dabaa nuclear power plant, 4 reactors. $25 billion in Russian financing, paid back over 22 years at 3% interest. Egypt gets nuclear energy without upfront capital. Russia gets a long-term financial relationship and technological dependency. The model works, and Tanzania is replicating it. Tanzania's non-aligned foreign policy gives it room to maneuver. It can engage Russia without triggering the kind of sanctions that hit countries in the Sahel after military coups. It can maintain ties with China and the US while deepening Russian partnerships. And as long as Tanzania remains democratic and stable, Western countries won't push back aggressively. That's the advantage of strategic ambiguity. You get the benefits of Russian investment without the geopolitical costs. But that ambiguity is narrowing. Every agreement signed, every technical expert trained in Moscow, every piece of infrastructure built with Russian financing. It all creates dependencies that are hard to reverse. And those dependencies shape future decisions in ways that aren't immediately visible but become unavoidable over time. Here's the part most people miss. This move didn't require a dramatic announcement. No summit. No treaty signing ceremony broadcast globally. Just an administrative decision, a project launch, a bilateral commission meeting, the kind of bureaucratic process that doesn't make headlines. And that's exactly why it matters. Because small, administrative decisions can have large geopolitical consequences. And by the time people notice, the patterns are already set. Tanzania's case fits into a wider realignment. Countries across the global south are diversifying partnerships, playing powers against each other, refusing to be locked into exclusive relationships, and using competition between China, Russia, and the West to maximize leverage. That's not anti-American. It's post-Western, a world where US and European influence is one option among many. Not the only option. Not the inevitable option. Just another choice. For the United States and Europe, this creates a problem. Influence used to flow from conditionality. Do it our way or lose access to markets, aid, and security partnerships. That leverage is eroding, because now there are alternatives. And those alternatives don't impose conditions. They just deliver. Russia's approach in Tanzania is state-to-state cooperation rather than public military presence. Long-term economic agreements rather than short-term aid. Quiet influence that compounds over time rather than visible deployments that trigger backlash. And it's working, because Tanzania isn't choosing Russia over the West. It's choosing both. And in the process, it's redefining what partnerships mean in a multipolar world. The long-term consequences aren't immediate. They're structural. Tanzania's energy sector will run on Russian technology for decades. Its engineers will be trained in Moscow. Its trade relationships will integrate with Russian supply chains, and its strategic positioning will reflect a reality where Moscow has embedded influence that can't be easily dislodged. This isn't about Tanzania becoming a Russian client state. It's about Tanzania gaining options, and using those options to maximize autonomy. That's the new game in Africa, and countries are getting very good at it. The uranium plant at Mkuju River launched in July 2025. Most media outlets didn't cover it. No major headlines. No analysis pieces. Just a quiet project launch in southern Tanzania. And that's exactly why it matters. Because while everyone was watching military coups and political drama in other parts of Africa, Russia was building something that will last decades. Something that changes leverage. Something that alters calculations. This is how influence shifts in the 21st century. Not through invasions. Not through dramatic confrontations. Through infrastructure. Through energy partnerships. Through training programs and technical cooperation. Through administrative decisions that don't make headlines but reshape futures. Russia just changed Tanzania's trajectory. Quietly. Deliberately. And most people didn't even notice.